Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Eloisa Ramos, and I'm here with my daughter, Sonia. And we are here studying the text of A Course in Miracles. We are continuing, we started chapter 19, the attainment of peace. And we are on section 2, sin versus error. Okay, so let me read paragraph 1 here. Okay. It is essential that error be not confused with sin. And it is this distinction that makes salvation possible. For error can be corrected and the wrong made right. But sin, were it possible, would be irreversible. The belief in sin is necessarily based on the firm conviction that minds, not bodies, can attack. And thus the mind is guilty and will forever so remain unless a mind, not part of it, can give it absolution. Sin calls for punishment as error for correction. And the belief that punishment is correction is clearly insane. Okay, so so this paragraph is pointing out the contradiction there, okay, because I grew up believing in sin, okay, and sin calls for punishment, okay, but error, on the other hand, it's a misperception, is a mistake, and that can always be corrected if we want to learn. If we're willing to learn and if we want to know the truth, right? But a lot of times when we believe in sin, we justify punishment because we think that it is correction for sin. Okay. And okay. And because the idea of sin implies no correction, okay, then punishment cannot be correction, okay? Because if punishment were correction, then it would not be a sin, it would be an error, okay? And error is not corrected through punishment, it's corrected through learning, okay? So the Course makes it, let's see, very clear, okay, that sin and error are not the same thing. And it's very easy to be confused because depending on, what religious or just whatever you grew up with, what beliefs you grew up with. Most of us confuse sin with error, I would say, at least in the Catholic religion. That's my experience. So, okay. And here's the problem, which is number 4. The belief in sin is necessarily based on the firm conviction that minds and not bodies can attack. Okay, so it's looking at the mind as if it was in the body or a body. Okay, because minds have no form, so how can minds attack? Right? So attack is experienced as as a body thing. I mean, sometimes, you can think, oh, well, she used words and I was verbally attacked. Okay, but it's all based on our interpretation of what those words mean and what the intention of the person was, maybe to hurt our feelings or something. But even so, the words themselves aren't going to do anything unless we give them meaning. That would be hurtful. So, okay, any questions on that, Sunny?
Just like clarification on the term absolution. What
Oh,
what
yeah.
is what is it referring to there?
Yes. So absolution is the idea of uh, going to confession and being absolved or pardoned for your sins. Yeah. So that would be, someone that supposedly has power to forgive sins, which would be like a priest who could absolve you of your sins.
Thanks.
Yeah. Um, and so the problem with that is then that if we believe that we are guilty, then we're stuck with the guilt until we receive forgiveness or absolution or pardon, right, from someone else. So it's basically a belief in condemnation, that condemnation has the power to make you guilty, and then you stay guilty until they choose to forgive you. And it's
So
not
then,
really forgiveness, huh? It's
so then,
absolution.
okay, so then that's also implying that salvation is basically we're screwed because we have to have somebody else forgive our sins, not
Exactly.
us. So there's no salvation for it in ourselves. It's
That's
just out
right.
there.
That's right. So
Oh,
we
okay.
we we become victims, because we become powerless in being able to save ourselves, even if we're sorry. Okay, even if we we regret what we did and we want to, make it quote unquote right. If the other person doesn't forgive us, doesn't absolve us, um, then we still believe that we're guilty. Um, so it's a little bit like, the Catholic Church has a policy on no divorce. Okay, so the only way to get out of a marriage is to apply to have your marriage annulled. So that would be that you would not be committing a sin if you divorce. That would be absolution of, you would have permission to do it. Yeah. Okay, number two.
Sin is not an error, for sin entails an arrogance which the idea of error lacks. To sin would be to violate reality and to succeed. Sin is the proclamation that attack is real and guilt is justified. It assumes the Son of God is guilty and has thus succeeded in losing his innocence and making himself what God created not. Thus is creation seen as not eternal, and the will of God open to opposition and defeat. Sin is the grand illusion underlying all the ego's grandiosity, for by it God himself is changed and rendered incomplete.
Yeah. So was that pretty clear?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so if I believe in sin, then I believe I have the power to attack, okay, and that the attack is real. Okay. And if I do it, I'm going to believe that uh, I have made you guilty, and that um, uh, the thing about sin though is that I'm basically judging, um, and I'm believing that my judgment is condemnation, that God would punish. My idea, my belief is that that God would be the punisher of what I have judged to be sinful. Um, so it's kind of weird because I'm I'm believing that um, sin is punished by God, but at the same time, I'm believing that I have the power to punish. So so that's why I justify my attack, because I'm saying that uh that basically God is behind my own judgment. Okay, which is not true. Which is not true. Um and that's why there's that line one, sin entails an arrogance, which the idea of error lacks. So so error is just a mistake. There's no clear intention. It's because I don't know. And if you point out my error and I see that I made an error, and I'm open to correcting it, then I learn from my error. Um, and so there's no arrogance there. That's actually, you could almost say there's humility there. Um, because I'm not saying, oh, I know everything, so I'm in a position to judge what is, good and bad and right and wrong. So, but sin is coming from a place of believing that I am in a position to judge, and that I know what is good and what is bad, and um, that I can decide that for God almost. I'm basically usurping the position and the throne of God when I when I'm looking and believing that that there's sin. So um, and of course, if I feel that I have sinned against God, then I'm going to believe that I have accomplished uh, basically attacking what is all powerful. So that makes me greater than all powerful, basically. Um, um, and then the other thing about sin is that it's a belief that there's a loss of innocence. And so that the self that was, quote unquote, born innocent or created innocent can change itself by doing things that are sinful. Um, and hence the creation of God, if God created us innocent, then that creation would not be eternal. And so the will of God would be open to opposition. And of course, defeat, because that's what sin is. It's an attack that would mean that God would not be all powerful, but the attacker would be more powerful. Um, and yeah, and so that's line 7. For by it God himself is changed and rendered incomplete. Okay, number 3. The Son of God can be mistaken. He can deceive himself. He can even turn the power of his mind against himself, but he cannot sin. There's nothing he can do that would really change his reality in any way, nor make him really guilty. Okay, that is what sin would do, for such is its purpose. Yet for all the wild insanity inherent in the whole idea of sin, it is impossible. For the wages of sin is death, and how can the immortal die? Okay, so this is bringing up the point that God is eternal. God's creation is eternal because you can only create like for like. And therefore the eternal cannot not be what it is. So the eternal cannot experience death. And sin implies that the self that God created becomes a body that can die and is no longer eternal like its creator, like God. So that's why it says that the wages of sin is death. So in order to die, you have to believe that you are the body that is not eternal. And therefore, you're going to have to believe that you have changed yourself. Okay, because God is eternal and God created us eternal. So in order to be a body, we would have to have changed ourselves. And therefore, we would have accomplished an attack on God, which would make us guilty. And that would be sin. And that's the error. That's the Son of God can be mistaken and he can deceive himself. And so that's what the atonement would undo, is the belief that it is actually possible to sin, or for the mind to attack itself, which would mean that it would be attacking God, because the mind is one with God who created it, one with itself. So it's a belief that the impossible is possible, basically, which is a contradiction. All right, so number 4.
Another tenet in the ego's insane religion is that sin is not error but truth, and it is innocence that would deceive. Purity is seen as arrogance, and the acceptance of the self as sinful is perceived as holiness. And it is this doctrine that replaces the reality of the Son of God as his Father created him, and will that he be forever. Is this humility? Or is it, rather, an attempt to wrest creation away from truth and keep it separate?
So in my experience, when I was growing up, sin was just assumed that that's what we are. So the best we could do was to have a good conscience meant that you didn't deny that you were guilty. Okay. So to deny that you were guilty would mean that you were basically you were evil. Okay, so this is all, upside down. Because basically we would be saying that that to believe that we are innocent would be evil. Okay. Because it would mean that you don't recognize that the truth is guilt or being a sinner, which is what this paragraph is saying, is that we have turned it completely upside down. That's what the ego's thought system is. It's an upside down perception of reality. And so it makes the foundation sin as the starting point for the truth of what we are. And then it works from there. So and so therefore you see a lot of people who, what's the word? Yeah, they accept themselves, they take pride in being sinful. Which is kind of a weird way of believing that you're, let's see, special, basically. Yeah, because it's perceived as holiness. So, the more sinful and the more the more I see myself as worthless and undeserving of salvation and love, and then the more I am, the more special I am, because I'm going to be saved, because Jesus saves sinners. So 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 there's a so it gets very that's why it's so insane. It's an ego's insane religion. And it's really, really confusing, because a lot of the doctrine that I grew up with, it just didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense, but it was really hard to say that, these, couple hundred of people that are here listening to what I'm listening to are wrong. It was really hard to say, well, gosh, they can't all, be deceiving themselves. They can't all be wrong, right? But yeah, and in fact, I think that we tend to congregate because we want to hold on to the error, and have others sort of back us up, because we don't want to let go of that idea. So we have to congregate to feel encouraged to not question these thoughts or these beliefs. So yeah. Okay, number 5. Any attempt to reinterpret sin as error is always indefensible to the ego. The idea of sin is wholly sacrosanct to its thought system and quite unapproachable except with reverence and awe. It is the most, quote unquote, holy concept in the ego's system. Lovely and powerful, wholly true and necessarily protected with every defense at its disposal. For here lies its quote unquote best defense, which all the others serve. Here is its armor, its protection, and the fundamental purpose of the special relationship in its interpretation. Yeah, my experience in is probably the hardest belief to really let go of. Letting go of the belief that where a body is up there with the belief in sin. And I work with a lot of people that have a lot of health issues, and when you get down to believing that I'm a sinner and I need to be punished, and people are not really willing, even though they're suffering, they're not really willing to let go of the belief in sin. So it's really, really held as sort of the holy sacrosanct. Okay, that's another Catholic term. That means sacred. Sacro is sacred, and sanct is sanctity, which is saintly. So it's sacred and saintly. So sin is holy, sacred, and saintly. Okay. Yes. So yes. So the best defense for the ego thought system is the idea of sin. If we let go of the idea of sin, we pretty much let go of the belief in separation, because we would recognize that the mind cannot attack, and that the separation has never happened, because we could not have attacked God and separated from God, and we could not have changed ourselves from how we were created. So it completely undoes the whole ego thought system. And it says, here is its armor, its protection, and the fundamental purpose of the special relationship in its interpretation. So the special relationship is a way to, let's see, to engage in what we consider to be love when it's really attack. It's sort of, let's see. It's a little bit like, when children play, and then they start escalating the play to the point where now they're starting to push and shove, or maybe they start calling each other names, and pretty soon they're basically fighting. Okay, and attacking each other. But it all started as fun and play. So it kind of just, yeah, it kind of works out in the special relationship. Okay, number 6.
Can indeed be said the ego made its world on sin. Only in such a world could everything be upside down. This is the strange illusion that makes the clouds of guilt seem heavy and impenetrable. The solidness that this world's foundation seems to have is found in this. For sin has changed creation from an idea of God to an ideal the ego wants. A world it rules, made up of bodies, mindless and capable of complete corruption and decay. If this is a mistake, it can be undone easily by truth. Any mistake can be corrected if truth be left to judge it. But if the mistake is given the status of truth, to what can it be brought? The quote unquote holiness of sin is kept in place by just this strange device. As truth, it is inviolate, and everything is brought to it for judgment. As a mistake, it must be brought to truth. It is impossible to have faith in sin, for sin is faithlessness. Yet it is possible to have faith that a mistake can be corrected.
Okay, anything, Sonia?
Yeah, actually, wow, I'm just thinking about politics, but also I didn't really realize, but in line 12 it says, it is impossible to have faith in sin, for sin is faithlessness. So I didn't actually look at the idea of sin as defined as faithlessness, but it is. Because it's sin is nothing. I mean, sin is the idea of lack of faith in what is true. I mean, what are you what? So I like that that's a good way to think of it.
Yes, so if we make a mistake and we make it truth, okay, um, we're operating under false premises. So everything that comes from that is going to be false. Um, and because it's false, there's nothing there that you can have faith in. um, let's see. So it's not because it's not reality, it's not really doing anything to reality, other than it's in our mind and we are unable to recognize that we are deceiving ourselves. Um, and that we're believing in what is not real. And that's basically what insanity is, because the mind is lost and is not able to tell the difference between reality and unreality, because it has started with a false premise to begin with, and it's not questioning that false premise. And so the whole process, yeah, line 8, if the mistake is given the status of truth, to what can it be brought? Okay, so you're basically stuck. If you make sin truth, you're stuck in a world of sin, attack, fear, guilt, destruction, and death. And you're stuck with the belief that you're a body. And there's a lot of pain and suffering that goes with that. And at some point, I think that we get tired of all the suffering, and we start looking for another way. And that's when the mind becomes open to questioning that foundation. Because until the mind is open to questioning that foundation, it just unconsciously perpetuates the error. So okay, so it and of course then the undoing of the error is what the Course in Miracles is all about. And so we bring everything to the truth. So all error is brought to the truth rather than bringing everything to the error. Yeah, because it's upside down perception. So line 13, it is possible to have faith that a mistake can be corrected. So we have to look at what we want to believe, okay? Because the mind can imprison itself by what it believes. And so if we want to believe that error is sin, we're just imprisoning our own mind. And that would be faithlessness. But it is possible to have faith that a mistake can be corrected. And sometimes it's the suffering that will flip that switch. And say, okay, there's got to be a better way. This is just too much suffering. So, okay, number 7. There is no stone in all the egos and embattled citadel that is more heavily defended than the idea that sin is real. The natural expression of what the Son of God has made himself to be and what he is. To the ego, this is no mistake, for this is its reality. This is the quote-unquote truth from which escape will always be impossible. This is his past, his present, and his future, for he has somehow managed to corrupt his father and change his mind completely. Mourn then the death of God, whom sin has killed. And this would be the ego's wish, which in its madness it believes it has accomplished. Yeah, so basically, it's about what we want to believe that we are. And in the ego thought system, the idea of sin says that the Son of God has made himself sinful, that the Son of God has changed himself and he's no longer as God created him. And that's what we are, that that there was original sin and we are all subject to that original sin. So to the ego, that is not a mistake. And so it looks at reality as if everyone is a sinner. And so, yeah. And so that implies that we accomplished an attack on God and therefore basically annihilated what was once all powerful. Because if you can be attacked, you cannot be all powerful. So we have basically killed our source of creation, and now we are self-creating and have no God because we're on our own now. And so that in itself is terrifying and fearful. But that implies that it actually happened. So sin, fear, and guilt are witnesses to the belief that the separation actually happened and that sin is reality and that that's what we are. And that's the belief system of the ego. Because it really believes that it accomplished this. And that's why up here it said that it was grandiosity or something like that. Yeah, that's up on paragraph 2, line 6. Sin is the grand illusion underlying all the ego's grandiosity. Okay, all right. Anything, Sonia, any questions?
This is relevant to this paragraph, but I just kept thinking that like because I know like it talks about sin and like the words that it uses is pertaining to like more Catholic terminology. But I think about like people at my work or like people that I know that are not religious, but the idea of sin is like still in there, even though we don't use that. We don't believe in those terms necessarily. But I just think about like how sneaky it is.
Yeah,
Because because yeah, the whole like when I'm talking to certain people, like I will notice that it's like they I think the idea of being humble is reversed, like we were saying before in the previous paragraphs. It's upside down in terms of the ego's view. Um, because it's always like a put down, like they always put themselves down in order to seem they don't want to take compliments or they don't want to like they'll be really like against like just accepting that like they're really like helpful or really like genuinely good people. Like they won't accept the belief like the idea that they're good, that they're
yeah,
inherently good.
yeah.
So I think that's the whole point of this whole paragraph is that it doesn't even matter if you believe in sin or not. It's still like ingrained
It's
in our culture,
ingrained. Oh,
especially in,
yeah.
I mean, America, like I don't know, like it's just sometimes when I talk to people, like it's just like I think that's something I'm probably need to clear look at in myself because it's like, yeah, it's like just you just can't accept that you're inherently good, that you're not sinful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that would make you sinful to accept it.
Right. It's like you're seen as a bad person for um thinking good things about yourself or like for not, yeah, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it has to do with the idea of being, let's see, judged by others, as worthy and unworthy, which comes from the idea up here that, you have to be, what was the word? You have to, it was that you have to be, you have to receive absolution. See, so people are looking for external, external, what's the word? Definitions of what I am, right? So,
Uh,
so, so like, so, so, so here's the thing, it gets flipped around. So sometimes people will not accept anything positive that you say, but they will accept the negative that you say.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's in alignment with what they think of themselves.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
bad, I'm worthless, I don't deserve good things.
Mhm.
Okay. So so instead of recognizing that our thoughts are projected and we see them in the world as our experience, we think that the world is the maker of us. Okay, so so whatever the world says, must be true, but it's really my own interpretation of what the world says that is true for me, because that's how I reinforce my own unconscious beliefs about myself. So I filter everything that comes to me, and I basically only accept or pick and choose those things that are in alignment with what I believe about myself.
Exactly it.
Yeah. And that's how we maintain and protect the ego thought system, because it's basically a self-image that we have made of what we think we are, because we no longer recognize the truth of what we are. So we have to make up these images and stories that tell us what we are, that we invented, So, yeah. Okay, so anything before we stop?
We didn't finish the last paragraph.
Oh, okay.
I just kind of went off on a tangent.
Okay, well, let's finish the last one then. Go ahead.
Okay. Would you not rather that all this be nothing more than a mistake, entirely correctable, and so easily escaped from that its whole correction is like walking through a mist into the sun? For that is all it is. Perhaps you would be tempted to agree with the ego that it is far better to be sinful than mistaken. Yet think you carefully before you allow yourself to make this choice. Approach it not lightly, for it is the choice of hell or heaven. But that's capitalized at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, so we really have to look at where these thoughts take us and what kind of experiences we're going to have by holding on to these ideas. So that's why line 3 is saying, perhaps you might be tempted to agree with the ego that it's far better to be sinful than mistaken, but you better think about that carefully, okay? Before you really decide and make that choice, because literally here, this is the choice between hell or heaven, because we're looking at basically suffering, or happiness. So I would rather be wrong and happy than be right and unhappy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, just a little while ago, I made a mistake, right? I thought we were finished, and we weren't. Okay, so um, we're gonna make mistakes. The point is that they're correctable. So thank you for the correction. Okay, and and there was no harm done. Nothing happened. Um, so there's nothing. Let's see. So the error, because it's correctable, does not need to be taken seriously, because it has no real effects. Okay, it only has real effects when we take it seriously, because we identify it as reality. And because we identify it as reality, we have to experience the effects, because that's what we believe. Otherwise, our beliefs wouldn't have any power, and they do, because the mind is powerful. So, yeah, so we want to look at our beliefs and really see what kind of experiences we're going to have by holding on to those beliefs. And and when we do have an experience that is that has suffering, where we experience suffering, we want to learn from that. We want to say, okay, what the heck am I believing here? Because I don't want to have to experience this again. Let's just look at the error, give it to the Holy Spirit for correction, and be done with it. So anyway, that's my approach. So so everything can be used for the healing of the mind, and all we have to do is look at everything and see that it's not a sin, it's an error, and then look at it and give it to the Holy Spirit for correction. Okay. All right. So anything before we stop? Anything else? No. All righty. Okay. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Until next time. Bye.